The words came out of Roland's mouth with surgical coldness as he held banking papers in front of my face. Starting now, the bank will transfer everything you have to my account. You just need a little corner to die in. I sat completely frozen in the dining room chair, unable to process what I was hearing. This was the man I had shared 28 years of marriage with, the father of my children, calmly telling me that I deserved nothing more than a little corner to die in after I had built every single cent of our wealth with my own 2 hands. My name is Claudette Pembroke. I'm 57 years old, and in that moment, sitting at the mahogany table I had purchased with my own money, I felt my entire world collapse into a single point of incomprehension. Roland stood over me, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the papers, his graying hair perfectly combed as always, his expensive cologne filling the space between us. Everything about him screamed composure, control, satisfaction. "Did you hear me, Claudette?" His voice had that particular quality I had learned to recognize over the past few years, the tone he used when he wanted me to feel small, insignificant, disposable. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat had closed completely. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, a rushing sound that made everything else seem distant and muffled. He continued, and with every word, I felt like I was drowning. "I've spent months preparing this. The lawyers have everything ready. The signatures are done. The bank appointment is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. By noon, all $8.4 million will be in an account with only my name on it." He paused, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. Satisfaction. Pure, undiluted satisfaction. "You've had your time in the spotlight, darling. You've had your moment of glory. Now it's my turn to have what I deserve." What he deserved. Those words cut through the fog in my brain. 28 years of marriage, 2 children. A lifetime of building something from nothing while he watched his own career crumble around him. And this was what he believed he deserved. Not half, not a fair division, but everything. Everything except a corner to die in. I tried to speak again. "Roland, don't." He held up his hand, cutting me off with a gesture so dismissive it made my chest physically hurt. "Don't try to negotiate. Don't try to reason with me. Don't try to use that brilliant financial mind of yours to find a way out. There is no way out. I've made sure of that." He walked around the table, his footsteps measured and deliberate on the hardwood floor. When he reached the sideboard, he poured himself a glass of the 18-year-old scotch, the bottle I had bought to celebrate selling my consulting firm 3 years ago for $6.8 million. I watched him take a slow sip, savoring it. "Do you know what it's like?" he said, his back still to me, "to be introduced at every event, every dinner, every gathering as Claudette Pembroke's husband? Do you have any idea what that does to a man?" I found my voice then, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You were never just my husband, Roland. I was nothing." He turned around, and for the first time, I saw real emotion in his face. Not the cold calculation from before, but something raw and ugly and festering. I was the VP who got fired. I was the consultant whose business failed. I was the man who couldn't keep up with his wife's success. Do you think I didn't hear the whispers? Do you think I didn't see the looks? My hands were shaking in my lap. I pressed them together, trying to still them, trying to find some semblance of control in a situation that was spiraling so far beyond my comprehension that I couldn't find solid ground anywhere. "I built that company from nothing," I managed to say. "My parents came here with 3 suitcases, Roland. 3 suitcases and a dream. I worked 70-hour weeks for 15 years. I sacrificed." "You sacrificed?" His laugh was bitter, harsh. "You sacrificed what exactly? Your marriage? Your children? Your husband's dignity?" "Yes, Claudette, you sacrificed all of that, and now it's time to pay for those sacrifices." He moved back toward the table, placing his glass down with exaggerated care. Then he spread out the papers in front of me, forcing me to look at them. I saw letterheads from banks I recognized, from law firms, from financial institutions. I saw signatures, my signatures, on documents I had never seen before. "These are forgeries," I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. "Prove it." Roland's smile was thin and cold. By the time you hire lawyers, by the time you start the legal process, by the time you gather evidence, the money will already be transferred and secured in offshore accounts. And then, my dear wife, you can spend whatever remains of your pathetic existence trying to fight me in court, trying to explain to Griffin and Petra how their father was forced to take such drastic measures because their mother was too selfish to share what was rightfully his. Griffin and Petra, our children. The thought of them sent a fresh wave of panic through my chest. Griffin was 32, a successful tax attorney in Boston with his own family. Petra was 29, a creative interior designer in Manhattan. Both of them had grown up watching their mother work endless hours, miss recitals and games and parent-teacher conferences. Both of them had been on the receiving end of my guilty generosity. Checks instead of hugs, money instead of time. You wouldn't, I whispered. They're our children, Roland. You wouldn't turn them against me. I already have. He leaned closer, and I could smell the scotch on his breath mixed with that cologne that had once made me feel safe and now made me feel nauseous. Who do you think they'll believe? The father who was always there, who picked up the pieces when you were too busy conquering the financial world? Or the mother who paid for their affection with trust funds and guilt money? I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had built a consulting empire by staying composed under pressure, by never showing weakness in boardrooms full of men who would have devoured any sign of vulnerability. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was my dining room, in my house, with my husband of 28 years telling me I deserved nothing more than a corner to die in. I gave you everything, I said, and I hated how my voice cracked on the last word. You gave me scraps. Roland straightened up, adjusting his cufflinks, the gold ones I had bought him for our 20th anniversary. You gave me the illusion of partnership while you controlled every single financial decision. You gave me a house in your name, investments in your name, a life in your name. Well, that ends tomorrow. Tomorrow, everything becomes mine, and you get exactly what you deserve, a little corner to die in. He picked up his glass and walked toward the doorway that led to the living room. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at me. Oh, and Claudette? Don't bother trying anything dramatic tonight. Don't bother calling lawyers or banks or anyone else. It's 8:30 on a Thursday evening. Nobody's answering phones. And by the time offices open tomorrow, it will already be too late. He took another sip of scotch. Sleep well, darling. Or don't. It doesn't really matter anymore. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the dining room with papers spread across the table that promised to erase everything I had spent 30 years building. I don't know how long I sat there. It might have been 5 minutes. It might have been 30. Time had become elastic and meaningless. I kept staring at those papers, at the signatures that looked almost exactly like mine but weren't, at the legal language that I understood perfectly, understood well enough to know that if these documents were processed, if those transfers went through, I would be fighting an uphill battle that could take years to resolve, a little corner to die in. The phrase kept echoing in my head. Not half the house, not a fair settlement, not even a contentious divorce with lawyers and mediation, just a corner, just enough space to cease existing without making too much noise about it. I heard water running upstairs. Roland had gone to the master bathroom for his nightly skincare routine, 40 minutes of expensive products and elaborate rituals that made him feel important, feel relevant, feel like he was investing in himself. He had been doing this for the past 2 years, ever since he read some article about successful men and their grooming habits. It was one of the few things that still made him feel like he had control over something. My hands had stopped shaking. That surprised me. I looked down at them, 57-year-old hands with age spots beginning to show despite regular manicures, hands that had signed contracts worth millions, hands that had built something from nothing. These hands that Roland had just declared worthless. I stood up slowly. My legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else, but they held me. I walked around the table to where the papers were spread out. In his arrogance, in his need to savor my humiliation, Roland had left everything right there. All the documentation, all the evidence, all the proof of what he had been planning for months. I picked up the first document and began to read. Really read. Not with the panic-clouded mind of 5 minutes ago, but with the sharp, analytical precision that had made me one of the most successful financial consultants on the East Coast. And as I read, something shifted inside me. The paralysis that had kept me frozen began to crack and crumble, because Roland, in his desperation to hurt me, in his need to make me suffer before he took everything, had made mistakes. Small mistakes. The kind of mistakes that a man who had never actually built anything himself wouldn't even recognize as mistakes. But I saw them. I saw every single one. The signatures weren't just similar to mine. They were too similar. Nobody signs their name exactly the same way twice. The pressure, the angle, the tiny variations that come from being human, they were missing. These signatures had been traced or forged so carefully that they looked more consistent than any real signature ever could. The jurisdictions were wrong. The temporary court order he had obtained claimed authority over assets that fell under federal jurisdiction, not state. Any halfway competent lawyer would catch that immediately. And there, buried in the third page of financial disclosures, was the most fatal mistake of all. He had listed every account he knew about, every investment, every property, every asset, except one. The offshore account containing $800,000 that I had inherited from my uncle Stanislaw in Poland last year. Money that Roland knew nothing about because I had kept it completely separate, held in trust by my uncle's estate lawyers. I felt something I hadn't felt in years of this slowly deteriorating marriage. I felt clarity. Cold, sharp, undeniable clarity. Roland thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. He thought that 28 years of slowly, systematically undermining my confidence, guilting me about my success, making me feel responsible for his failures. He thought all of that had finally accomplished what he wanted. A wife too paralyzed by guilt and fear to fight back. But he had forgotten something fundamental. He had forgotten who I actually was beneath all that guilt and all that fear. He had forgotten that I was the daughter of Polish immigrants who had rebuilt their lives from nothing. He had forgotten that I was the woman who had walked into rooms full of men who didn't think I belonged there and walked out with signed contracts worth millions. He had forgotten that I had survived and thrived in a world that had tried to make me small long before he ever did. The water was still running upstairs. I could hear it through the ceiling. 40 minutes of skincare routine. 40 minutes where Roland would be completely absorbed in his own reflection, his own rituals, his own desperate attempt to feel significant. I walked calmly to the credenza, where I kept my phone charger. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart rate had slowed. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled past family, past business associates, past everyone until I found the name I needed. Iris Drummond, my best friend for 20 years. The woman who had survived her own nightmare marriage to an abusive husband 15 years ago. The woman who had rebuilt her life and now owned one of the most successful art galleries in Manhattan. The woman who knew exactly what it felt like to be told you were worthless by someone who was supposed to love you. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Claudette? It's late. Is everything? I need help. My voice was steady now. Clear. Roland is trying to steal everything. He has forged documents. He has a bank appointment tomorrow morning. He told me I just need a little corner to die in. There was a pause on the other end. Not shock, not disbelief, just the pause of someone who had been through this before and knew exactly what needed to happen next. Are you safe right now? Iris asked, her voice shifting into a tone I had only heard a few times, the tone of someone who had learned to fight back and won. Yes, he's upstairs. He left the documents on the table. Photograph everything, every single page. Send them to my email and to 3 other addresses I'm going to text you right now. Don't confront him. Don't let him know you're doing this. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you will be in the office of Margaret Chen. She's the best fraud attorney in New York. I'll text you the address. Can you do that? Yes, and I meant it. For the first time in months, maybe years, I meant it completely. Claudette? Iris's voice softened just slightly. You're not dying in any corner. Do you hear me? You're not dying at all. I heard the water shut off upstairs. Roland would be moving on to the next phase of his routine. Moisturizer, eye cream, the expensive serum he had ordered from France. 20 minutes, maybe 25 before he came back downstairs. I hear you, I said to Iris. I'll photograph everything now. Good. I'll see you at 8 a.m. sharp. And Claudette? He's going to regret this. I promise you that. She hung up, and 3 seconds later, my phone buzzed with text messages containing 4 email addresses and an office location on Fifth Avenue. I walked back to the dining room table. I opened my phone's camera, and I began photographing every single document Roland had left there in his arrogance, his need to make me watch my own destruction, his absolute certainty that I was too broken to fight back. But as I captured image after image, as I sent them one by one to the email addresses Iris had provided, I felt something else rising in my chest. Not panic, not fear, not even anger, though that would come later. What I felt was the cold, calculated determination that had carried me through 3 decades of building something meaningful in a world that had tried to tell me I couldn't. Roland had made one final, fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. And tomorrow morning, he was going to learn exactly how devastating that mistake was. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Instead, I sat in the guest bedroom, the room I had been sleeping in for the past 18 months, ever since Roland decided our marriage was better conducted from separate spaces, and I let myself remember how we got here. My name is Claudette Pembroke, and I was born, Claudette Kowalski, in a tiny apartment in Newark, New Jersey, to parents who had arrived from Poland with nothing but hope and determination. My father worked 3 jobs. My mother cleaned houses during the day and sewed alterations at night. They spoke broken English and dreamed in Polish, and they taught me one thing above all else, that in America, if you were smart enough and worked hard enough, you could build something that no one could take away from you. I believed them. God, how I believed them. I put myself through Rutgers on scholarships and student loans, working 20 hours a week at a campus bookstore. I was the first person in my family to graduate college. My mother cried through the entire ceremony. My father just held my diploma in his rough, calloused hands and said, "This is yours, forever yours." I met Roland when I was 29 and finishing my MBA at Wharton. He was 31, already a VP of operations at a multinational corporation, charming and articulate and everything my hardworking immigrant parents wanted for me. Stability, respectability, success. He wore expensive suits and knew which wines to order at dinner. He made me laugh. He made me feel like I had finally made it, like I had crossed some invisible line from the daughter of immigrants to someone who belonged in rooms with chandeliers and 7-course meals. We got married 6 months later. Small wedding, just family and close friends. I wore my grandmother's pearls that my mother had carried from Poland. Roland's parents came from Connecticut. Old money, country club memberships, the kind of Americans who had never had to build anything because it was already there waiting for them. They smiled politely at my parents' accents and asked my father what he did, as if his 3 jobs weren't enough to qualify as doing something. The first 10 years were good, really good. Roland was making solid money. I was building my consulting firm slowly and carefully, taking clients one at a time, building reputation through results rather than flash. We bought a modest house in Stamford. We had Griffin 2 years into the marriage. Petra came 3 years after that. I took maternity leaves, came back to work, juggled client meetings and pediatrician appointments and preschool pickups. Roland traveled for work. I traveled for work. We were busy, stressed, normal. But we were a team, or at least I thought we were. The shift started around year 12. Roland's company went through restructuring. His division was eliminated. He spent 6 months unemployed, sending out resumes, going to interviews that never materialized into offers. I could see it eating at him, but I tried to be supportive. I picked up more clients. I worked longer hours. I made sure he knew that we were fine financially, that my business was growing, that this was just a temporary setback. He finally found another position, but it was a step down. Associate VP instead of VP. Smaller company, less prestige, less money. And by then, my consulting firm had taken off. I had developed a specialty in helping mid-sized companies optimize their financial operations, and I was good at it. Really good. Word spread. Clients came, money came, success came. And with every step up I took, Roland seemed to take a step back. By year 15, I was making triple what he was making. By year 18, I was making 10 times what he was making. And by year 22, when he got laid off again at 53 and couldn't find anyone willing to hire him, The income disparity had become a chasm that neither of us knew how to cross. I tried to be sensitive about it. I never flaunted my success. I never made him feel small, or at least I tried not to. But how do you hide success when it's reflected in every aspect of your life? The house we bought in Greenwich for $3.2 million, my money. The private schools for Griffin and Petra, my money. The vacations, the cars, the country club membership that Roland insisted we needed to maintain appearances, all my money. He tried to start his own consulting business after the layoff. I supported him completely. I helped him with his business plan. I introduced him to potential clients. I did everything I could think of to help him feel relevant again, successful again, like the man I had married who had made me feel safe and sophisticated and loved. But his business never took off. He would get 1 or 2 small contracts, nothing substantial, nothing that paid more than a few $1,000s. Meanwhile, I sold my firm 3 years ago for $6.8 million. Add that to our investments, our properties, our retirement accounts, and we had a total net worth of $8.4 million, except it wasn't really we, it was me. 98% of everything we had came directly from my work, my clients, my business. Roland had contributed maybe $200,000 total over our entire 28-year marriage. The math was brutal and undeniable, and somewhere in those last 6 years, something broke inside him. I watched it happen in slow motion, like watching a building collapse from the inside out. The charming man I married became bitter. The supportive husband became passive-aggressive. The partner became an adversary. He started making comments, small ones at first. Must be nice to be the breadwinner. I guess my opinion doesn't matter much since I'm not the one paying for it. You've always been better at making money than making a marriage work. Little cuts, little wounds, each one designed to make me feel guilty for succeeding while he failed. I absorbed them all. I told myself he was hurt, that his ego was bruised, that he needed time to adjust. I tried to be smaller, quieter about my achievements. When people asked what I did, I downplayed it. When invitations came for speaking engagements or award ceremonies, I sometimes declined because I knew it would upset Roland to watch me being celebrated. But it was never enough. Nothing I did was ever enough to make him feel better about himself. The real deterioration started about 3 years ago, right after I sold my company. I thought retirement would help us. I thought that if I wasn't working anymore, if I was just home, available, present, maybe we could rebuild what we had lost. Maybe we could remember why we had chosen each other in the first place. Instead, Roland saw my retirement as an opportunity. He started pushing for us to equalize our accounts. He said it was only fair, that we were married, that what was mine should be ours. He wrapped it all in the language of trust and partnership. Don't you trust me, Claudette? After all these years? Don't you think I deserve to have equal access to our money? Our money. He always said our money, even though we both knew the truth. I resisted at first. Some instinct. Maybe my father's voice in my head, reminding me that what you build is yours forever, told me to protect what I had earned. But Roland was relentless. He used my guilt about being an absent mother. He used my guilt about emasculating him with my success. He used every vulnerability I had ever shown him as a weapon to pry open my defenses. So I compromised. I put the Greenwich house in both our names. I added him as a co-owner on one account with $500,000. I thought if I met him halfway, he would be satisfied. I thought if I showed him I trusted him, he would stop seeing me as the enemy. But compromises never satisfy people who want everything. 6 months ago, I suggested divorce for the first time. We were sitting in the living room, barely speaking to each other anymore, sleeping in separate rooms, living separate lives under the same roof. I said it as gently as I could. Roland, maybe it's time we admit this isn't working. Maybe we'd both be happier apart. His reaction terrified me. Not because he was violent. Roland had never laid a hand on me. But because he was so cold, so calculated in his cruelty. He said that if I divorced him, he would make sure Griffin and Petra knew every single thing I had done wrong as a mother. Every missed recital, every forgotten birthday, every time I had chosen work over them. He said he would paint me as a monster who had sacrificed her family for money. and that no court in America would look kindly on a woman who had abandoned her children to chase wealth. It was a lie, of course. Griffin and Petra were adults. They had their own lives, their own families. They didn't need their father to tell them about my shortcomings. They had lived them. But the threat worked because it touched the deepest wound I carried. The guilt of being a mother who was never quite present enough, never quite available enough, never quite enough. So I stayed. And Roland knew he had found the perfect weapon. For the next 6 months, he escalated. He insisted on being added to more accounts. He demanded access to investment portfolios. He wanted his name on everything. And he used my guilt and my fear of losing my children's respect as leverage for every single demand. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that during all of this, Roland was planning something far more devastating than I could have imagined. He wasn't just trying to get equal access to our money. He was trying to take all of it. He had been researching, planning, consulting with lawyers who specialized in what he called recovering marital assets unfairly controlled by one spouse. He had joined online forums where men in similar situations shared strategies for fighting back against emasculating wives. He had spent months perfecting forgeries of my signature, practicing until he could reproduce it well enough to fool a bank employee who wasn't looking too carefully. And all the while, he had been building a narrative. Poor Roland, married to a woman so obsessed with success that she had frozen him out of all financial decisions. Poor Roland, who had sacrificed his own career to support his wife's ambitions. Poor Roland, who deserved compensation for years of being treated as less than an equal partner. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. And I had been so consumed by guilt, so desperate to keep peace, so afraid of being seen as the villain in my own family's story, that I hadn't seen it coming. Until tonight, until he stood over me in our dining room and told me I deserved nothing more than a little corner to die in. I looked at the clock on the guest bedroom nightstand, 5:47 in the morning. In 2 hours and 13 minutes, I would be sitting in Margaret Chen's office, and Roland, who thought he had already won, would be getting ready for a bank appointment that was never going to happen the way he planned. My phone buzzed. A text from Iris. "Coffee is ready. I'll be outside your house at 7:30. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." I smiled for the first time in hours. Then I got up and walked to my closet. I pulled out the Armani suit I had worn when I closed the biggest deal of my career. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, expensive in a way that whispered rather than shouted. I laid it on the bed next to my grandmother's pearls. Today, I was going to remember who I was before Roland spent years trying to make me forget. Iris picked me up at 7:30 sharp, driving her sleek black Mercedes that somehow managed to look both elegant and aggressive at the same time. She took one look at me in my Armani suit and pearls and nodded with approval. "Perfect. You look like someone who owns her life, not someone begging to keep it." She handed me a travel mug of coffee. "Margaret is expecting us at 8. I briefed her last night on everything you told me. She's already started preliminary work." I slid into the passenger seat, and as Iris pulled away from the house, I looked back at the Georgian Colonial that I had bought with my own money, that had my name on the deed along with Roland's now, that represented everything I had built and everything he was trying to take. The morning sun hit the windows, making them gleam like gold. It was beautiful, and in that moment, I hated it with every fiber of my being because it had become a prison I had paid for myself. "Did you tell anyone where you're going?" Iris asked as we merged onto the highway toward Manhattan. "No. Roland thinks I'm paralyzed. He thinks I'm upstairs in the guest room, probably crying, definitely not fighting back." I took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. Strong, black, exactly how I needed it. He's probably still asleep. He always sleeps well after he thinks he's won something. Iris's jaw tightened. He's about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating women. The drive into Manhattan took 40 minutes. Iris spent most of it filling me in on Margaret Chen. She specializes in financial fraud within marriages, mostly represents women whose husbands tried to hide assets during divorce, or who attempted to steal money through various schemes. She's won cases against men who thought they were untouchable. Her success rate is 93%. She's expensive, but she's worth every penny. "How expensive?" I asked, because even in crisis, my financial consultant brain needed to know the numbers. $50,000 retainer. But Claudette, she'll get you millions back. This isn't an expense. It's an investment in destroying Roland's plan completely. Margaret Chen's office was on the 32nd floor of a building on Fifth Avenue, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She was 52 years old, according to the biography Iris had sent me. But she looked younger. Sharp black suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that was all business. When we walked into her conference room at 8 a.m. exactly, she was already surrounded by papers, 2 laptops open in front of her, and a phone on speaker with someone who sounded like a forensic accountant. She ended the call when she saw us and stood to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, confident. Mrs. Pembroke, Iris has told me the broad strokes. Let's start with the documents you photographed last night. I pulled out my phone and began showing her the images. She studied each one with intense focus, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, sometimes zooming in on specific sections. After reviewing all 37 photographs, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with something that might have been satisfaction. Your husband is either very stupid or very arrogant. Probably both, she tapped one of her notes. These signature forgeries are good enough to fool a casual observer, but nowhere near good enough to pass forensic analysis. See here, and here, the pressure is too consistent. Real signatures have natural variation in pressure and flow. These look like they were traced or created using signature-generating software. Can you prove that? I asked. Already working on it. I have a forensic document examiner on retainer who can have preliminary analysis done by this afternoon. But there's more. She pulled up something on her laptop and turned it to face me. This temporary court order he obtained. It claims jurisdiction over assets that are actually under federal purview, not state. Any competent judge would have caught that, which means either the judge he went to wasn't competent, or your husband misrepresented the nature of the assets in his filing. Either way, it's not legally valid. I felt something loosening in my chest. So the bank transfer can't happen? Oh, we're going to make absolutely certain it doesn't happen. But I need more information from you. Margaret opened a fresh document on her laptop. Walk me through the entire financial picture. Every account, every asset, every property. I need to know exactly what we're protecting. For the next hour, I detailed everything. The sale of my consulting firm for $6.8 million. The investment portfolios worth approximately $1.3 million. The Greenwich house worth $3.2 million. The vacation property in Vermont worth $400,000. The retirement accounts, the savings, the stocks, the bonds, everything that added up to $8.4 million in total net worth. Margaret typed rapidly, occasionally asking clarifying questions. And how much of this came from your income versus his? 98% is mine. Roland contributed approximately $200,000 over the course of our marriage, mostly in the first 10 years when he was still employed at a decent salary. Do you have documentation proving the sources of all this money? Yes, I kept meticulous records, tax returns going back 30 years, business financial statements, sale documents from the consulting firm. Everything. Margaret smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted vulnerable prey. Good, because we're not just going to stop his fraud attempt. We're going to make sure that when this is over, you walk away with what's rightfully yours, and he walks away with whatever a judge decides he deserves for his $200,000 contribution, which, given that he just attempted to commit felony fraud, might be less than he thinks. Iris, who had been sitting quietly beside me, spoke up. What's the timeline? His bank appointment is at 10 this morning, correct? Margaret glanced at me for confirmation. That's what he said. Then we have, she checked her watch, 1 hour and 43 minutes. Here's what's going to happen. At 9:15, my associate is going to arrive at Mercer & Strauss with documentation proving that those signatures are forgeries, along with an emergency injunction blocking any account transfers. We'll also have a forensic document examiner's preliminary report, and we'll have evidence that the court order Roland obtained was based on fraudulent representations. What if the bank doesn't cooperate? I asked. Banks cooperate when you threaten them with liability for processing fraudulent transfers, and Mercer & Strauss is not going to risk a multi-million-dollar lawsuit to help your husband steal from you. Margaret stood up and walked to the window, looking out over Central Park. But there's something else we need to discuss. Criminal charges. The words hung in the air. Criminal charges. Against my husband, the father of my children. What kind of charges? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Margaret turned to face me. Forgery. Fraud. Obtaining a court order through false pretenses. Possibly identity theft. These aren't minor offenses, Mrs. Pembroke. This is serious criminal behavior that could result in significant prison time. I thought about Roland's face last night when he told me I needed a little corner to die in. I thought about the months he had spent planning this, perfecting forgeries, building a legal framework to steal everything I had worked 3 decades to build. I thought about the coldness in his voice, the satisfaction in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he was going to win. What do you recommend? I asked. That depends on what you want. If you want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, I have contacts in the Manhattan DA's office who would be very interested in this case. If you want to use the threat of prosecution as leverage in divorce proceedings, that's also an option. But you need to decide what outcome you're looking for here. I looked at Iris. She had been through something similar. An abusive husband who had tried to control her through money and fear. She had fought back, divorced him, rebuilt her life. I had watched her transformation from a woman who flinched at loud noises to someone who ran a multi-million-dollar art gallery with absolute confidence. What did you do? I asked her. With your ex-husband? Iris's expression was hard. I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. I pressed charges. He served 18 months. And when he got out, I had a restraining order and a divorce settlement that left him with nothing but his own shame. Margaret was watching me carefully. You don't have to decide right now. Let's get through this morning first. Stop the immediate threat. Then we can discuss long-term strategy. At 9 o'clock, Margaret's associate, a sharp young woman named Rachel Kim, left for the bank with a briefcase full of documentation. Margaret, Iris, and I stayed in the conference room, waiting. Margaret had arranged for a video feed from the bank, coordinated through their security department once they understood the severity of the situation. At 9:47, my phone rang. Roland's name appeared on the screen. Don't answer it, Margaret said immediately. But he might, what? Realize you're not at home, paralyzed with fear? Good. Let him panic. Let him wonder what's happening. You have no obligation to make this easier for him. The phone rang 4 more times, then stopped. A minute later, a text came through. Where are you? We need to talk. I showed it to Margaret. She read it and shook her head. Classic control tactic. We need to talk really means I need to reestablish dominance and make sure you're still complying. Don't respond. At 9:53, Margaret's laptop pinged with a notification. She opened a window showing a security camera feed from inside Mercer and Strauss. I could see the bank lobby, elegant and marble-floored, with several employees at desks and a few customers waiting in the seating area. Rachel should be meeting with the senior vice president right now, Margaret said. She's showing him everything. The forgeries, the fraudulent court order, the evidence that this is an attempted theft of marital assets. We watched in silence. At 9:58, I saw Roland walk into frame. He was wearing his best suit, the navy Tom Ford I had bought him 2 years ago, and he was carrying a leather portfolio. He looked confident, almost cheerful. He approached the reception desk and said something to the woman sitting there. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was real. This was actually happening. My husband of 28 years was walking into a bank to steal $8.4 million from me, and he thought he was going to succeed. The receptionist picked up her phone, spoke briefly, then gestured for Roland to wait. He sat down in one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, crossing his legs casually, checking his phone like this was just another business appointment. At 10:03, a man in a dark suit emerged from a hallway, presumably the bank manager Roland had been working with. But behind him was Rachel Kim, along with 2 other men I didn't recognize. One of them was wearing what looked like a police uniform. Roland stood up, smiling, extending his hand to shake the bank manager's hand. But the manager didn't take it. Instead, he said something that made Roland's smile falter. Then Rachel stepped forward and began speaking. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I watched the color drain from Roland's face. I watched his posture change from confident to defensive. I watched him try to argue, gesturing with his hands, his face getting red. One of the men with Rachel, the one in the police uniform, moved closer to Roland. He was saying something now, and Roland was shaking his head vigorously, backing away slightly. The bank manager looked uncomfortable. Several other employees had stopped what they were doing to watch, and a few customers were starting to notice that something was wrong. Margaret's phone rang. She answered it on speaker. "Yes?" Rachel's voice came through, calm and professional. "The senior VP has confirmed that no transfers will be processed. Mr. Pembroke is currently being informed of the criminal nature of his actions. The officer here is from the fraud division and has agreed to escort Mr. Pembroke from the premises. Do we want to proceed with pressing charges immediately, or should I have the officer simply document the incident for now?" Margaret looked at me. "Your call, Mrs. Pembroke." I stared at the screen, watching Roland argue with the police officer, watching him pull out papers from his portfolio, watching him try to explain, to justify, to control a situation that had completely slipped beyond his control. This man who had told me I needed a corner to die in. This man who had spent months planning to take everything from me. This man who had used my guilt and my love and my fear against me as weapons. "Document it for now," I heard myself say. "But I want the option to press charges later." "Understood," Rachel said. "I'll make sure everything is properly documented and that Mr. Pembroke understands he is not to contact Mrs. Pembroke or attempt any further financial transactions without proper legal authorization." "Perfect," Margaret said, and ended the call. On the screen, I watched the police officer hand Roland what looked like official documentation. Roland read it, his hands shaking slightly, his face pale. Then he looked up at the security camera, almost like he knew I was watching, and for just a second, I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but fear. Pure, undiluted fear. The officer gestured toward the exit. Roland stood there for another moment, then slowly gathered his papers and walked toward the door. The bank employees watched him go. One customer whispered something to another, and just like that, it was over. Roland left the bank without the $8.4 million he had come to steal. I realized I was crying, not from sadness or even relief, but from something deeper. The release of years of tension, of fear, of feeling like I was slowly suffocating in a marriage that had become a prison. Iris put her hand on my shoulder. "It's done. The immediate threat is done." But Margaret was already typing on her laptop, already moving to the next phase. "Now, we go on offense," she said. "Rachel is filing an emergency restraining order as we speak. I want him out of your house by tonight. I also want emergency freezes on all joint accounts pending divorce proceedings, and I want a full forensic accounting of where every penny of marital assets came from." "How long will this take?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "The restraining order should be approved within hours. The divorce itself could take months. But given the attempted fraud, I think we can push for an expedited process." "And Mrs. Pembroke?" Margaret looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You need to prepare yourself for what comes next. This isn't over. Roland is going to fight back. Men like him don't give up easily, especially when they've been publicly humiliated. He's going to try to turn your children against you. He's going to try to paint himself as the victim. He's going to make this as ugly as possible." "Let him try," I said, and I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I've spent 28 years trying to make him feel better about himself. I've made myself smaller, quieter, less successful to protect his ego. I'm done protecting him. Let him see what happens when I stop." Margaret smiled, a real smile this time. "Good, because we're going to need that energy for what comes next." My phone rang again. Roland calling for the 6th time that morning. This time, I answered. I didn't say anything, just listened. "Claudette." His voice was different now, strained, desperate. "What did you do? What the hell did you do?" "I protected myself," I said calmly. "Something I should have done years ago." "This is insane. I'm your husband. We're supposed to work things out together. You can't just—" "You told me I needed a corner to die in, Roland. You tried to steal $8.4 million from me. You forged my signature. You lied to a judge. You committed fraud. And you thought I was too broken to fight back." I paused. "You were wrong." There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice I had never heard before, small, almost childlike, he said, "Please, Claudette, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake. I was angry. I wasn't thinking clearly. We can go to counseling. We can work this out." "No," I said. "We can't. It's over, Roland. Our marriage is over. And by tonight, you'll be out of my house. Don't try to contact me again except through attorneys." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the sheer overwhelming sensation of taking back control after so many years of surrendering it piece by piece. Margaret was watching me with approval. That was perfect. Clear, firm, no room for negotiation. Now let's talk about what happens when you go home. The restraining order was approved at 2:37 that afternoon. Margaret called to tell me the news while Iris and I were having lunch at a small bistro near her gallery, though I hadn't been able to eat more than a few bites. My stomach was twisted in knots, oscillating between triumph and terror. "The judge signed off on everything," Margaret said, her voice crisp and satisfied. "Emergency restraining order requiring Roland to vacate the premises immediately. Temporary freeze on all joint accounts pending forensic accounting, and a preliminary injunction preventing him from disposing of any marital assets. The sheriff's department will escort him from the house at 4 p.m. to collect essential personal items. You should not be present when this happens." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, realizing that my own house, the house I had paid for, was now a place I needed to avoid for my own safety. "Stay with Iris, or check into a hotel. Anywhere but home for the next few hours. Give Roland time to process what's happening and leave peacefully. Tomorrow morning you can return with a police escort if you'd like. But tonight, let's avoid any confrontation." After the call ended, Iris reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're staying with me. I have a guest suite with a lock on the door, a fully stocked wine cellar, and absolutely no tolerance for men who try to steal from their wives. It's settled." I nodded, grateful beyond words. The reality of what was happening was starting to sink in. My marriage was truly over. Not the slow death it had been dying for years, but violently, publicly, irrevocably over. And there was no going back. At 3:15, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom?" It was Petra, my daughter. Her voice sounded strange, tight, confused, upset. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Petra, sweetheart. Hi. Dad just called me. He's crying. He says you've kicked him out of the house, that you've turned lawyers on him, that you're trying to destroy him." "Mom? What's going on?" He sounded absolutely destroyed. I closed my eyes. Here it was, the thing Margaret had warned me about. Roland weaponizing our children's emotions, painting himself as the victim, making me the villain in a story he was carefully crafting. "Petra, it's complicated. Your father and I—" "He said you've frozen all his bank accounts. He said he can't even access money for a hotel room. Mom, how could you do that to him? Whatever problems you two are having, you can't just leave him with nothing." The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Roland had literally told me I deserved nothing but a corner to die in, had tried to steal every cent I owned, and now he was playing the victim because he couldn't access money that was 98% mine to begin with. "Petra, your father tried to steal $8.4 million from me. He forged my signature on bank documents. He committed fraud. What I'm doing is protecting myself from criminal behavior." Silence on the other end. Then, "That can't be true. Dad wouldn't do that." "It is true. I have documentation. I have proof. I have witnesses. Your father spent months planning to take everything from me and leave me with nothing. But why would he do that? That doesn't make any sense. You're married. You're supposed to share everything." And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that Roland had been counting on. The belief that because we were married, what I had built was automatically his. The belief that my success was our success, even though he had contributed almost nothing to creating it. "Petra, I need you to listen to me carefully. I love you. I have always loved you. And I know I wasn't the mother you deserved when you were growing up. I know I worked too much and missed too many moments. But what your father did wasn't about fairness or sharing. It was about control and punishment. He told me, to my face, that I only needed a corner to die in." I heard her sharp intake of breath. He said that? He said that. And then he tried to make it happen. Another silence, longer this time. When Petra spoke again, her voice was smaller, younger. I don't know what to believe. Griffin is calling Dad right now. We're both so confused. This is all happening so fast. I know, baby. I know it's confusing. But I need you to trust that I would never do something this drastic unless I absolutely had to. Your father committed crimes, Petra. Serious crimes. And I'm protecting myself the only way I can. Can we meet? Tomorrow, maybe? You, me, and Griffin? We need to talk about this as a family. Family. The word felt strange now, like something from another language I used to speak fluently but had forgotten. What was family when the foundation it was built on turned out to be lies and manipulation and resentment? Yes, I said. We can meet, but I need you to see the documentation first. I need you to understand what actually happened before your father spins this into something it's not. Okay, I'll wait to see the proof. But Mom? He sounded so broken on the phone. I've never heard him like that. He's broken because he got caught, Petra, not because he's sorry for what he tried to do. After we hung up, I put my head in my hands. Iris rubbed my back in slow circles, not saying anything, just being present. That was the thing about true friendship. Sometimes the greatest gift was just bearing witness to pain you couldn't fix. At 4:18, Margaret texted me, "Roland has left the premises. Sheriff confirmed he took one suitcase of clothing and personal items. He's currently staying at a Holiday Inn off I-95. House is secure. You can return tomorrow morning." One suitcase. 28 years of marriage reduced to one suitcase of belongings. I thought about all the things still in that house. His expensive suits, his collection of watches, his skincare products, the golf clubs I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago, hoping he'd take up a hobby that made him happy. All of it still there, but him gone. It's really over, I said out loud, testing the words, seeing how they felt. Iris poured me another glass of wine. It's really over. And tomorrow, you start building whatever comes next. That night, in Iris's guest suite, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Petra's voice on the phone. Confused, hurt, caught between two parents who were both telling her different versions of reality. I kept thinking about Griffin, who I knew would be even more skeptical, even more likely to believe his father's victim narrative. I kept thinking about how I was going to prove to my own children that protecting myself from their father didn't make me the villain. But mostly, I kept thinking about Roland's face on that security camera at the bank. The moment when his plan collapsed. The moment when he realized I had fought back. The moment when 30 years of underestimating me came crashing down around him. And for the first time in years, maybe in my entire marriage, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. I felt powerful, not guilty, not apologetic, not small, just powerful. Tomorrow I would go home to my house that I had paid for with money I had earned, and I would start building a life where no one ever told me I needed a corner to die in. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, I let myself feel the full weight of what I had done. I had destroyed my marriage to save myself, and somehow, impossibly, that felt like the first honest thing I had done in years. I returned to the house the next morning at 9 a.m. with a police escort, just as Margaret had recommended. Officer Davis was a woman in her mid-40s who had clearly dealt with domestic situations before. She was professional, calm, and stood by the front door while I walked through my own home, feeling like a stranger. Everything looked exactly the same. The furniture I had chosen, the art I had collected, the kitchen where I had barely cooked because I was always working. But it felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Roland's presence, his resentment, his constant low-level hostility, all of it was gone. The house could breathe again. I was in the master bedroom, looking at the empty space in the closet where Roland's suits had hung, when my phone rang. Griffin's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom." His voice was tight, controlled, the voice he used in court when he was about to deliver an argument he had carefully prepared. "Petra and I need to see you. Today. We need to talk about what's happening with you and Dad." "Of course. I want to explain everything. Dad's lawyer sent us documentation. Copies of bank statements, property records, everything. He's saying you've controlled all the finances for years, that you've systematically excluded him from decisions, that you've basically held him hostage financially. Griffin paused. Mom, is that true? I sat down on the edge of the bed that Roland and I hadn't shared in over a year. What's true is that I earned 98% of the money in this marriage. What's true is that your father tried to steal everything from me through forged documents. What's true is that he told me I only needed a corner to die in. He denies saying that. Of course he does, but he said it. And Griffin, I have proof of everything he tried to do, not stories, not my version of events, actual documented proof of fraud. Silence on the other end. Then, Petra and I will be there at 2 this afternoon. We want to see everything, all of it. And Mom, we want Dad's lawyer to be there too. We want to hear both sides. My stomach clenched. Griffin, this isn't a negotiation. Your father committed crimes. Then show us the proof. If it's as clear-cut as you say, the proof will speak for itself. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, feeling the old, familiar guilt trying to claw its way back into my chest. My children wanted to hear both sides, as if there were two equally valid perspectives on forgery and fraud, as if their father's feelings somehow balanced out his criminal actions. I called Margaret immediately. Griffin wants a family meeting this afternoon. He wants Roland's lawyer there. He wants both sides presented like this is some kind of debate. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Do you want my advice or my professional recommendation? Both. Professional recommendation. Don't do it. You don't owe anyone a performance of evidence. The courts will handle this. Your children will eventually see the truth. Don't put yourself in a position where you're being cross-examined by your own kids while your husband's lawyer tries to poke holes in your trauma. And your advice? Your children need to see you strong. They need to see that you're not the villain Roland is painting you as. If you do this meeting, you do it on your terms, in a neutral location, with me present, and with absolutely no tolerance for manipulation or gaslighting from Roland or his representation. I thought about Griffin's voice on the phone, professional, distant, treating this like a legal case rather than his mother's survival. I thought about Petra's confusion yesterday, her belief that family meant sharing everything, her inability to understand that love doesn't entitle you to steal. Set it up, I said. Neutral location. You present the evidence. I won't have Roland's lawyer interrogating me in my own home. Margaret made it happen within 2 hours. 4 p.m. at her conference room. Griffin and Petra. Roland's lawyer, a man named Stephen Hutchins who specialized in men's rights in divorce cases. Margaret and me. And every piece of documentation proving what Roland had tried to do. Officer Davis stayed with me until noon, then left after confirming the house was secure. I spent the next hours preparing myself mentally for what was coming. I pulled out every piece of evidence I had. Tax returns showing the sources of our income, business records from my consulting firm, documentation of the sale, bank statements showing deposits and withdrawals, and most importantly, the photographs I had taken of Roland's forged documents, along with the forensic analysis Margaret had obtained proving they were forgeries. At 3:45, Iris drove me to Margaret's office. Do you want me to come in with you? She asked. No, this is something I need to do alone. Well, not alone, but with my kids. They need to see me handle this. Call me when it's over. I'll be waiting. Griffin and Petra were already in the conference room when I arrived. Griffin looked every inch the successful attorney. Expensive suit, leather briefcase, expression carefully neutral. Petra looked smaller, more vulnerable, wearing a simple dress and no makeup, like she had been crying. When they saw me, neither of them stood or came over to hug me. They just sat there, waiting. Roland's lawyer, Stephen Hutchins, arrived 5 minutes later. He was exactly what I expected. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of man who probably told his buddies at the country club about how he was fighting back against the system that discriminates against men. He shook hands with Griffin, nodded politely at Petra, and completely ignored me. Margaret opened the meeting with clinical precision. We're here because Mr. and Ms. Pembroke have requested to see evidence of their father's actions. I'm going to present documentation in chronological order. I ask that there be no interruptions until I'm finished. She started with the financial history. Tax returns going back 28 years showing the sources of income. My consulting firm's growth. Roland's employment history and subsequent unemployment. The stark disparity in earnings. She put numbers on a screen that couldn't be argued with. $6.8 million from me, $200,000 from Roland over the course of our marriage. Griffin's expression didn't change, but I saw Petra's eyes widen slightly. I don't think she had ever seen the actual numbers before. I don't think she had understood just how imbalanced the financial reality of our marriage had been. Then Margaret moved to the forged documents. She displayed the photographs I had taken, side by side with examples of my real signature from legal documents we both knew were authentic. She showed the forensic analysis pointing out the inconsistencies, the too perfect pressure, the lack of natural variation, the evidence of tracing. These documents, Margaret said, her voice clear and unemotional, were created by your father with the intent to transfer $8.4 million from your mother's accounts into accounts bearing only his name. This is not a dispute about fair division of marital assets. This is documented fraud. Stephen Hutchins cleared his throat. If I may. You may not, Margaret said sharply. I said no interruptions. She continued, showing the fraudulent court order Roland had obtained, explaining how he had misrepresented the nature of the assets and the jurisdiction. She showed bank records of the accounts Roland had tried to access. She showed everything methodically, thoroughly, leaving no room for alternative interpretation. When she finished, the conference room was silent. Petra had tears running down her face. Griffin's neutral expression had cracked slightly, showing something underneath. Shock, maybe, or anger. I couldn't tell which. Stephen Hutchins stood up. Mrs. Chen, while I appreciate your presentation, you're leaving out significant context. My client was effectively frozen out of all financial decisions for years. He had access to every joint account, Margaret interrupted. He chose not to use it because he was saving his efforts for stealing everything at once. That's a gross mischaracterization. It's a documented fact. Your client forged signatures. He filed fraudulent court documents. He attempted to steal millions of dollars. No amount of context changes those facts. Griffin finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, like he had been holding his breath. Dad knew about these accounts? He had access? Margaret pulled up more documentation. Every joint account showed both names. Your father had full legal access. He chose to forge documents for accounts that were solely in your mother's name. Accounts funded entirely by her earnings. Petra was looking at me now, really looking at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us how bad things were? And there it was, the question I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Why didn't I tell them? Why did I protect their father's image for so long? Why did I let them believe in a marriage that had been dead for years? Because I was ashamed, I said quietly. Because I blamed myself for your father's unhappiness. Because I thought if I just tried harder, worked less, made myself smaller, he would be okay again. And because I didn't want you to see your parents' marriage as a failure. But it was a failure, Griffin said. Not cruelly, just stating a fact. Yes, it was. But I kept trying to save it anyway. Right up until the moment your father told me I only needed a corner to die in. Petra's sob was audible. He really said that? He really said that. And then he laid out his plan to take everything from me. Not half, not a fair division. Everything. He wanted to leave me with nothing. Stephen Hutchins tried again. My client was experiencing a mental health crisis. He was not in his right mind. Then he should have sought help, Margaret said coldly. Not committed multiple felonies. Griffin stood up and walked to the window, his back to all of us. I watched his shoulders rise and fall with deep breaths. When he finally turned around, his expression was something I had never seen before. My son looking at me not as his mother who had failed him, but as a person who had survived something terrible. I need to talk to Dad, he said. I need to hear his side. Of course, I said. You should talk to him. You should hear what he has to say. But Griffin, the evidence doesn't change based on his feelings. The forgeries don't become real because he was unhappy. The fraud doesn't disappear because he felt emasculated. Petra stood up too, walked over to me, and did something she hadn't done in years. She put her arms around me and hugged me tight. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I believed his version without asking yours first. I held my daughter and felt something breaking open inside me. Not breaking apart, but breaking open. Like a seed that had been buried for too long, finally cracking through its shell to reach light. You didn't know, I whispered. How could you know? I spent years hiding it from you. Griffin came over then, more hesitant than his sister, but he came. He put his hand on my shoulder. Not quite a hug, but connection. Mom, I'm going to talk to Dad, but I want you to know, the numbers don't lie. Whatever his reasons were, what he tried to do was wrong. Stephen Hutchins gathered his papers. My client is prepared to discuss settlement terms. Your client is prepared to accept whatever terms the court decides are fair, Margaret said. Given his attempted fraud, I suspect those terms will be significantly less generous than if he had approached this honestly. After Hutchins left, the four of us sat in the conference room, me, my 2 children, and Margaret. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, making everything look golden and surreal. What happens now? Petra asked. Margaret answered before I could. Divorce proceedings. Likely settlement given the evidence, though your father's lawyer may push for trial. Asset division based on actual contribution. Possibly criminal charges depending on what your mother decides. Criminal charges? Griffin's lawyer brain was working now. Mom, if you press criminal charges, this becomes public record. It could affect Dad's ability to ever work again. It could destroy him completely. He tried to destroy me completely, I said. He tried to leave me with a corner to die in. I know he did. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying you need to think about what you want the end result to be. Justice, revenge, protection, all 3? I thought about Roland at that bank, his face when he realized his plan had failed. I thought about him in a Holiday Inn off I-95, probably still believing he was the victim in this story. I thought about the years he had spent slowly poisoning our marriage with his resentment and bitterness. I want protection, I said finally. I want him never to be able to do this to anyone else. And I want my life back. The life I built. The life I earned. The life he tried to steal. Petra squeezed my hand. Then that's what we'll make sure happens. When I left Margaret's office that evening, with my children beside me for the first time in what felt like years, I realized something profound. I had been so afraid of losing them, so terrified that the truth would turn them against me, that I had nearly lost myself trying to protect a lie. But the truth, ugly and painful as it was, had set something free. Not just me, all of us. Roland had tried to destroy me. Instead, he had destroyed the prison I had been living in without even realizing it. And now, standing in the golden evening light with my daughter's hand in mine and my son's solid presence beside me, I understood what came next. I was going to build something new, something honest, something that was entirely, completely, unapologetically mine. And no one, not Roland, not guilt, not fear, was ever going to take it from me again. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Roland fought every step of the way, not because he had any legitimate claim to the assets, but because fighting was the only form of control he had left. His lawyer filed motion after motion, each one more desperate than the last, trying to argue that Roland deserved half of everything because marriage was a partnership, because he had sacrificed his career, because he had been psychologically damaged by living in my shadow. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, too documented, too undeniable. The forensic accounting showed exactly what Margaret had presented to my children. 98% of our net worth had come directly from my work. The forgeries were proven beyond any doubt. The fraudulent court order was dismissed, and the judge, a woman in her 60s who had probably seen too many cases like mine, was not sympathetic to Roland's victim narrative. In the end, Roland received $300,000. It was more than generous considering he had contributed only $200,000 over 28 years and had attempted to commit fraud, but Margaret advised me to agree to it. It's enough to make him go away, she said. It's not enough to let him feel like he won. And it closes this chapter definitively. He also received supervised visitation rights with any future grandchildren, a clause that felt absurd since Griffin's daughter was already 5 years old and barely knew her grandfather, and absolutely no claim to the house, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, or any future earnings I might generate. He lost his request for alimony. He lost his request for half the Vermont property. He lost everything except those $300,000 and whatever dignity he could salvage from the wreckage of his own making. The criminal charges were a harder decision. The district attorney wanted to prosecute. Cases of spousal financial fraud were apparently more common than I had realized, and they wanted to make an example. But in the end, I agreed to a plea deal. Roland pled guilty to forgery and fraud, received 2 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a permanent criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. No jail time, but enough consequences that he would never be able to pretend this hadn't happened. Griffin told me later that when the plea deal was finalized, Roland had called him crying, begging him to intercede, to talk me into withdrawing the charges. Griffin had told him no. "You made your choices, Dad. Now you live with the consequences." My son, the lawyer, understanding that actions have repercussions that tears and apologies can't erase. Petra took it harder. She wanted to believe in reconciliation, in healing, in the possibility that our family could somehow be stitched back together. It took months of therapy, for her, not for me, though I started going too, before she could accept that some things, once broken, can't be mended. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let the pieces lie where they fell and build something new instead. I sold the Greenwich house 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I couldn't stand to be in those rooms anymore, couldn't walk through that door without remembering Roland standing over me with forged documents, telling me I needed a corner to die in. The house sold for $3.4 million, $200,000 more than I had paid for it. I donated the profit to a women's shelter that specialized in helping survivors of financial abuse. I bought a smaller place in Manhattan, a 2-bedroom condo on the Upper West Side with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. It cost $1.8 million, which meant I still had money left over, plenty of it. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, enough to help my children if they needed it, enough to never worry about having just a corner. Iris helped me furnish the new place. We spent weekends going to galleries and antique shops, choosing pieces that reflected who I was now, not who I had been trying to be during my marriage. Bold colors instead of safe neutrals, modern art instead of traditional landscapes, furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive, a home that felt like mine in a way the Greenwich house never had. The first night I slept there, alone in my new bedroom, with the city lights twinkling outside my window, I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like grief. I had spent 28 years of my life with a man who had looked at everything I built and seen only what he was owed. I had spent years making myself smaller to make him feel bigger. And now, finally, I could stretch out. I could take up space. I could exist at my full size without apology. Griffin and I had dinner once a month now, usually at a restaurant halfway between Boston and New York. Our relationship was still careful, still tentative, but it was honest in a way it had never been before. He told me about his cases, asked for my advice on financial matters, let me be the grandmother to his daughter that I had never quite managed to be a mother to him. We were building something new, slowly, on a foundation of truth rather than guilt. Petra came to visit every few weeks. She would stay in my guest room, and we would talk late into the night about things we had never discussed when I was married, my childhood, my parents' struggles, the choices I had made and the ones I regretted. She was learning to see me as a person, not just as her mother, and I was learning to let her. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was real. 6 months after the divorce, I got a call from a woman named Jennifer Morrison. She had read about my case in the local news. Apparently Roland's plea deal had made the papers, and she wanted to talk to me about starting a consulting service for women going through financial abuse in marriage. She was a lawyer who specialized in family law, and she had seen too many cases where women stayed in dangerous situations because they didn't understand their financial options. I told her I would think about it, but the truth was, I already knew my answer. I had spent 30 years building a consulting business, helping companies optimize their finances. Maybe it was time to use those skills to help women optimize their lives. We launched the service 3 months later. Pembroke Financial Advocacy, a nonprofit that provided free financial consulting to women in abusive marriages or going through difficult divorces. We helped them understand their assets, document their contributions, prepare for legal battles. We connected them with lawyers like Margaret, therapists like the one Petra was seeing, support systems that could carry them through the hardest parts. The demand was overwhelming. We had more requests than we could handle. Women who had been told they were nothing without their husbands. Women who had built businesses their husbands tried to claim. Women who had been financially isolated and controlled for years. Women who, like me, had finally reached the point where they would rather fight than continue dying slowly in corners they didn't deserve. I hired staff, I trained volunteers, I worked with Margaret to create template documents that women could use to protect themselves. I gave speeches at women's conferences about financial literacy and independence. I wrote articles about recognizing financial abuse. And slowly, purpose began to fill the spaces that pain had occupied for so long. 1 year to the day after Roland told me I needed a corner to die in, I stood in my office overlooking Central Park and thought about how strange life was, how the worst thing that had ever happened to me had somehow led to the most meaningful work I had ever done, how being broken open had let light in, how losing everything I thought I had revealed what I actually possessed: strength, resilience, the ability to rebuild. My phone rang. It was Iris, calling to remind me about dinner that night at her gallery opening. "Wear something fabulous," she said. "We're celebrating." Celebrating what? Living, surviving, thriving. Take your pick. I looked around my office, at the photos on my desk. Griffin and his family, Petra laughing at something, my parents on the day I graduated from Wharton. I looked at the files on my desk representing 12 women currently going through what I had survived. I looked at my reflection in the window. 58 years old now, with gray hair I had stopped coloring, wearing a suit I had chosen because I loved it, not because it made anyone else comfortable. "All three," I said to Iris. "We're celebrating all three." That evening, getting ready for the gallery opening, I caught myself smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep inside, not put on for anyone else's benefit. I was alone in my apartment, no one watching, no one to perform for, just me, in my own space, living my own life. I thought about Roland sometimes, wondered if he ever understood what he had really lost. Not the money. He had never cared about the money except as a way to hurt me, but the chance to be part of something real, the chance to celebrate someone he loved instead of resenting them, the chance to build a partnership based on mutual respect rather than competition and control. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. He was a chapter in my story, not the whole book, and I was still writing new pages. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, leaving the lights on in my apartment because I could, because it was mine, because no one was going to tell me I was wasting electricity or being irresponsible or taking up too much space. I had been told I needed a corner to die in. Instead, I had claimed an entire life to live in. And I was going to live every single moment of it on my own terms. At 58 years old, I was finally, completely, unapologetically free. And that, I thought, as I stepped into the elevator and descended into the glittering New York night, was worth everything it had cost to get here.